y'all have been sleeping on what is possibly the greatest Dragon Ball game of all time. You probably instantly thought of Budokai 3 and Tenkaichi 3, but nah. Those are Dragon Ball Z games, telling the story of Goku fighting Frieza, fighting Cell, fighting Majin Buu, but I'm talking OG Dragon Ball. The days of world tournaments, of King Piccolo, of when Tien was a main character. And the greatest Dragon Ball game of all time, Advanced Adventure. My name is Josue, welcome to the Panic Brother channel, and let's get into it. There really aren't that many Dragon Ball games out there. Sure, we have a ton that explore the Dragon Ball Z story, but so many are scared to tap into the original adventures of Kid Goku going through Emperor Pilaf, the Red Ribbon Army, and the World Tournaments. There was Dragon Ball Origins 1 and 2 for the 3DS, and Revenge of King Piccolo for the Wii, but none of them did it like this Game Boy Advance classic. I'm not gonna lie to you, I think I have Advanced Adventure in probably my top 10 personal favorite video games of all time, and I want to tell you why. I think it goes without saying that the sprite work in this game is beautiful. Considering this game released in the later years of the Game Boy Advance, it seems like the developers of this game utilized the Game Boy Advance to its fullest. Characters move so lively with a ton of detail put into the character design. The backgrounds are also meticulously crafted as well. It truly gives every single area of the game its own unique feel. The World Tournament is clearly the World Tournament, and plowing through Emperor Pilaf's castle has its own look compared to, let's say, something like the Muscle Tower, which by all accounts should look kinda similar, but Dimps did a stand-up job doing the best they could to make this game potentially one of the best looking video games on this system. And I'm confident that if you're a Dragon Ball Z fan, you're no stranger to the name of the developer, Dimps. You see, Advanced Adventure isn't actually Dimps' first rodeo with the Dragon Ball series, as they were the original creators of the Budokai trilogy, typically considered some of the best Dragon Ball Z games in its history. And while those games were originally intended for the 6th generation home consoles, they were no stranger with developing for the Game Boy Advance, as they created not only Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, but the classic Sonic Advance trilogy. Dimps clearly knew what they were doing during this era of developing video games, and all of the lessons learned from developing the Budokai series clearly bled into Advanced Adventure, especially the 1v1 fighting. I'm skipping ahead for sure, but I'd be remiss to not bring up what could potentially be Advanced Adventure's greatest strength, 1v1 fighting. There weren't many fighting games developed for the Game Boy Advance, considering the console only offered 4 buttons that you could work with. Yeah, the Game Boy Advance wasn't exactly tailor-made for that genre of gaming. Yet, Advanced Adventure made the most of it. As soon as you near the first World Tournament in the game, Master Roshi walks Goku through the mechanics of 1v1 fighting, a mode entirely separate in gameplay style from the rest of the game. Goku goes toe-to-toe with an enemy, and using a combination of the 4 buttons allows you to duke it out. The A button allows you to jump, which can be useful in avoiding enemy attacks or getting behind them. B is to attack, typically in the form of a punch. Moving backwards will allow you to guard and defend yourself. The shoulder buttons allow a special move which consumes your energy. In the case of Goku, for example, he can charge up a Kamehameha, a powerful move that must be charged up, can be cancelled, and only goes in the flow of one direction. Attacking can often lead to a clash of blows with your opponent, but one will inevitably take charge of the situation and break your guard, hitting you with a combo that will ultimately send you flying high in the air, where you or your opponent will immediately follow up in the sky and knock you right back down. It's such an insanely cool mechanic that, after fighting in many 1v1 matches in this game, it honestly never gets old. I could do this all day. There's a lot of thought and care put into this 1v1 mode, with enough behind it that it could make playing with your friends enough of a good time, especially considering it has its own separate mode dedicated to it where you can choose from among 8 different characters, with only 6 being playable upon completion of the story mode after defeating each of them in their respective battles. Goku plays just as I mentioned, with the extra added detail of being able to hang in the air for a bit with his tail, and Krillin seems to be a clone of him, but replacing his air hang with a different animation. Jackie Chun also has the Kamehameha, but he can't hang in the air, and he seems to be a bit slower than Goku. Grandpa Gohan seems to be a clone of Roshi in a similar fashion as Krillin is to Goku. Tien has a Dodonpa and can actually stay in the air for an extended time due to being one of the only characters in OG Dragon Ball who can fly. General Tao also has a Dononpa, but he can't double jump and he has a longer combo in the air. To think a fighting mode at this deep of a level of mechanics is just a small part of the overall experience is insane. But I think it's about time we shift gears and finally talk about the real meat of the game, story mode. The mode covers nearly every single major plot point of the original Dragon Ball series throughout 16 separate levels, with the main notable exceptions being Penguin Village, which could be just because they couldn't get the rights to the Dr. Slump characters, and the entirety of the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai arc, most likely because Goku is already an adult in that arc and this game only wanted to focus on the adventures of Kid Goku. You start off having to save the turtle, then go through meeting Yamcha, to Emperor Pilaf, to the first World Tournament, to the Red Ribbon Army, to whatever happened in that cave, to Fortune Teller Baba, to the second World Tournament, to finally everything involving King Piccolo. Typically levels will follow a platformer style of gameplay, as you need to avoid endless pits and climb obstacles while also fighting against a multitude of enemies. Controlling Goku is similar to how you'd control him in 1v1 fighting, with the exception that there is no way to guard against attacks. You end combos with your power pole, which can actually get extended by unlocking power-ups for it throughout the course of the game. And you have a second shoulder button attack, which will allow you to use the power pole and a massive AoE attack that usually wipes a majority of enemies in the screen away. While some levels try to mix it up like the Roshi training level where you have to get the Rocky through in a time limit, or the second to last level which is more of a maze than anything else, most levels will take around 10 to 15 minutes to complete and usually ends with a boss fight. You'll fight Emperor Pilaf and his gang at the end of that level, General Blue at the end of the cave level, and even Devilman at the Fortune Teller Baba level. Quick note, Devilman is probably the most annoying boss in this game. The fight is accurate to the manga with having a massive hole in the middle of the arena, but that's exactly why it's annoying. It sucks to play in, and hitting Devilman is just annoying. Muscle Tower actually has multiple bosses that you can fight against, and what I love is that each have moves and animations that are clear adaptations from how they fought in the original story. Major Metallotron must be hit in the head, Ninja Murasaki hides and has clones, and Bouillon can only be hit after freezing him. I'm sad that Android 8 isn't really featured in this game at all, but besides that, the developers clearly respected the source material to such a high degree, and I offer my kudos to the team. It often leaves each fight feeling so unique, to the point that despite it having already been a couple of weeks since I played this game for this video, I remember each of these fights really well. This platformer slash beat 'em up style is just one of the 3 styles the game has to offer, with the last being Goku on his flying Nimbus. You can move freely across the screen and jump anywhere you'd like since Nimbus will catch you. Not many levels utilize this style of gameplay though, with the main examples being the first half of the Goku invading the Red Ribbon Army level, and the initial fight against Oolong, who, weirdly enough, doesn't join Goku for the rest of his adventures in this game. In fact, no one really does, since the game takes a couple of liberties in the story. It's more so just representative of how many games were like this in this era of video games. Game Boy Advance games would just tell abridged versions of the story, and that was no exception here. Main characters in the original Dragon Ball are barely ever seen in this version of the story. Krillin doesn't appear much if at all besides the training level and the World Tournament when he dies. Yamcha is barely seen after his fight, leading to some weird discrepancies that doesn't tell the complete Dragon Ball story. Now granted, a majority of Dragon Ball is still adapted here, but small moments are affected, such as beating Tien allows Goku to win the 22nd Tenkaichi Budokai, despite him having lost in the original story. The Fortune Teller Baba level is arguably one of the biggest victims here. Without Krillin or Yamcha's involvement, you only end up fighting against 2 of Baba's fighters, Devilman and Gohan, which are the only 2 Goku fought against in the manga, thus you omit Fangs the Vampire and Bandages the Mummy. All of the World Tournament fighters that Goku doesn't personally face against is also missing here, like Krillin's fight against Bacterian. I mentioned this not really criticizing the game for it, just more so pointing it out. It doesn't detract from the game, but it does offer some weird hiccups in what could potentially be here, considering you unlock Krillin as a playable character after going through the story mode once. Krillin is more than just a simple reskin of Goku too. Playing as him serves as a new game plus of sorts, as you have the same high HP you do at the end of Goku's campaign, as well as 4 bars of energy. Krillin has a faster combo due to not having a power pole integrated in his skill set. He can double jump, which helps tremendously when platforming, can kick enemies in the air, has a different down aerial, has a black flying nimbus, which I assume represents how tainted his heart actually is, uses the solar flare as opposed to the power pole special move which stuns every opponent on screen except for bosses, and can do a high jump at any given moment. This was something Goku was only able to do at specific moments in the campaign, but allowing Krillin to do it anytime you want allows him to access areas Goku was never able to in the original campaign. I also just love his face icon in the corner. This New Game Plus plays every single level the exact same way as the original campaign, minus the cutscenes, and this presents a weird dilemma as it could have been the perfect opportunity to fight opponents only Krillin fought against in the original Dragon Ball, like the aforementioned Bacterian. This truly isn't the end of the world or anything. It just feels like a missed opportunity when you consider how polished the rest of the game is. Beating the game once as Krillin unlocks King Piccolo in 1v1 fighting. He's humongous compared to the rest of the fighters, so he's insane to play as. The other unlockable character is Cyborg Tao, just a clone of the regular Tao. Completing this game also unlocks Extra Mode, where you play as Goku and you revisit each of the levels of the game. In the original campaign, you'd have these red doors that are completely shut, but in Extra Mode they're now all open, and you can find a number of items in the rooms these doors lead to. They range from minigames to Dragon Balls that allow you to play as different characters beyond just the 8 that are accessible in 1v1, like Yamcha and Chaozu. The minigames aren't really much of anything. You have catching Krillin, rock crushing, and 2 different methods of a boss rush of sorts, where you can use all the characters you unlocked in Extra Mode. The regular game is honestly pretty short. It can finish the entire thing in maybe an hour, hour and a half. Add another hour and a half if you're playing in hard mode, which isn't a joke. But this New Game Plus, Extra Mode, and 1v1 fighting kinda serve as methods of lengthening that playing time to an additional 2 or 3 hours. Playing through each of the levels multiple times doesn't exactly seem like the most fun post-game content out there, but I commend Dims for finding ways to give players more to do and unlock in this little Game Boy Advance game. And allowing 30 different playable characters is just so cool. I couldn't get myself to play through all of Extra Mode, so I have to reference clips from other YouTubers. From the graphics to its level design, to its structure, to its versus mode, to its post-game content, to its overall presentation, to its level of detail, it feels like there's 1,000,001 reasons to fall in love with Dragon Ball Advanced Adventure. The original Dragon Ball series seems to have a harder time marketing itself to the masses, considering it has no real reliance on heavy action and transformations. That OG series is truly what the name of this video game is. It's an adventure, and representing that story through an adventure game makes this game feel especially unique, considering barely any other Dragon Ball Z game has ever really attempted to replicate this style of gameplay. We usually only ever get traditional fighting games, with the only other real mix-ups being RPGs like Attack of the Saiyans and the Legacy of Goku trilogy. Sure, there was sagas, but we don't like talking about sagas. The only other real comparison in the modern age is Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, which, while good in its own right, is just totally different compared to the arcadey feel of Advanced Adventure. Funny enough, as mentioned before, the only real missing element of the Dragon Ball story in Advanced Adventure is the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai, which shall be represented in Kakarot through the form of DLC, so it kind of all ends up working out. The original Dragon Ball tale is just so fun, so emotional, and so lighthearted, and it's a shame that a majority of Dragon Ball fans don't know roughly 40% of the total Dragon Ball story. While it's still a bridge in its storytelling, I highly recommend all of you to check out Dragon Ball Advanced Adventure to get that story told. It's truly one of my favorite video games of all time, with little to no negatives to the game. It's honestly kind of hard to think of a negative, to be honest. The only one that comes to mind is that it's impossible to go back to the main menu of the game while playing through story mode or extra mode without having to reset the game. Yeah, it's pretty annoying, but it doesn't take away from what is pretty much a near perfect game. With just an hour and a half runtime, you can easily get through all of it in a lazy afternoon. I'd love to hear what you all think about this game. And stay tuned, because soon enough we're going to be tackling another Dragon Ball game on the Game Boy Advance. Except, I'm not looking forward to it at all.